evening, and welcome to the Pittsburgh Public Schools February Business and Finance meeting. It is Monday, February 3rd. Tonight we have one item on the agenda, which is a presentation from the Manchester Chateau TRID. And at this point, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Good evening. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
My name is James Reed, and I'm the Senior Manager of Development Finance at the URA. I am here to talk about the Manchester Chateau TRID. I want to thank PPS leadership for giving us the opportunity to present again. Today I'm going to be focusing on an update, so I'll be providing primarily new information that that came about as a result of a community meeting that was held by Council President Lavelle in partnership with Manchester Citizenship Corporation on January 14th. So you're going to see me jump through a number of slides, so I apologize if it's a little herky-jerky for folks that are viewing online. I'm going to try to keep it as crisp as possible. With that, I'll go ahead and get started. So why am I here today? I'm here to provide an update specifically about the community engagement process that we've undergone with the Manchester Chateau TRID. And so you'll see on this slide, you'll see that there are three categories of calendars that really take us back all the way to October of 2017 and actually before that to talk about the different community inputs that have gotten us to where we are today seeking approval for the Manchester Chateau TRID. So the first thing that I want to talk about is on the community and stakeholder engagement side. This started years back, I believe back to 2017, early in 2017 with the Manchester Chateau neighborhood plan. And one of the key recommendations out of that neighborhood plan was to complete a TRID study. And from there was a TRID study that was completed, I believe, from around 2019, 2020 to 2021. And let me see if I have my dates correct. Yeah, around that time period. And so we then moved to drafting the TRID implementation plan. So from that study, what we got were a number of community-related investments that would help unlock the development. And so one of the key recommendations from the Manchester Chateau TRID was to support the Esplanade Development Project, which is a critical component to the Manchester Chateau TRID, and then also support the TRID by supporting the Esplanade. So in terms of feedback, I want to highlight just a couple of things as you're looking through the calendar dates that were there. So over the course of this time, between the Manchester Chateau neighborhood plan and the TRID study, we held over 45 stakeholder interviews and meetings, over five public meetings with approximately 400 attendees, and we had 3 surveys with over 100 unique responses, and there was overwhelming support from the surveys for the Manchester Chateau TRID. Now, one of the things that we did here at our community meeting was that the public, those members there, felt that the community engagement was insufficient. And we acknowledge that frustration. It's one of the things that we note in our line of work that's very challenging to do. I'm sure folks in this room are familiar to getting bombarded by online surveys. I mean, every time I go to Giant Eagle, I get an online survey request. I don't fill out any of them. And I don't say that to be glib or anything, but just to note that getting folks their attention in our world where we are taken aback by and inundated by tons of tasks every single day is very challenging. And we worked as hard as we could and as diligently as we could to use multiple methods of communication, multiple types of engagement over the course of several years to form the content, to form the meat of the TRID planning study. And so those things informed what you saw when we were here in December, the eligible uses of TRID funds, and one of those being most critically affordable housing. And I will talk a little bit more about the scale of the affordable housing that we will that we're proposing to have funded by TRID dollars. And so with that, I just want to note in terms of ongoing activities for community input, we're in the middle of the TRID legislative process. And so we are, right now we're here on February 3rd before the Business and Finance Committee at Pittsburgh Public Schools. Our next activity will actually be a public hearing on February 12th, held by City Council. And we are still in the process of scheduling our engagement with Allegheny County for the legislative process. So each of these opportunities that we've identified are other opportunities for community input, and we really encourage and hope that we get robust input as we're moving forward. And then on the Esplanade site development itself, because URA land is involved in that project, the developers will be required to come back to the URA at several key points over the course of their development, including any time that they want to build vertically. So what we are planning to do with them right now is to advance the sale of the land, which would allow them to do site preparation over about a course of a year. And after a course of the year, they would come back to the URA's board and say, we're ready to build our first vertical phase. When they come back for a second vertical phase, they would also have to come back to the URA board of directors, provided that that second phase involves URA land. So, this is really just to encapsulate and highlight that there's been significant and ongoing community input, and that we believe that the TRID plan that has been drafted represents a significant benefit for the city of Pittsburgh and the neighborhood. And so with that, I'm going to move to just a couple of slides to talk about sort of the mechanics of the TRID process. So how does TRID work? The one thing I really want to emphasize on this slide is the difference between a LRTA and a TRID. I know that this body is very familiar with LRTAs. It's been it's been close to a decade since you all last saw a TRID, which would have been in 2016. But essentially the key difference is that the developers are responsible for paying their entire tax bill. Whereas with the LRTA, they're seeking a reduction on the taxes that they actually have to pay. With the TRID, they will be paying the full amount of taxes, and as you can see on this graphic, what the projections are estimating is that between the three taxing bodies, we're going to be talking about roughly $8 million of tax revenue generated from the Esplanade site, and that's going to be with real estate tax, parking tax, and amusement tax. And so what would happen during this TRID is, as the properties or the assets that generate tax revenue come online, they would either be reassessed or they'd be generating tax revenue, and that tax revenue would go a portion of that tax revenue would go to pay back debt that is used to advance TRID eligible projects. And so what we're estimating here is that the split would be $6 million to go towards the debt service payments, and $2 million would be retained by the taxing bodies on a pro rata share during that value capture period. So that's a 20-year period. And one of the things to note is that what does this mean specifically to Pittsburgh Public Schools? So right now, the school district is receiving roughly $37,000 in tax revenues from this site. Upon full completion and activation of the properties, that projected annual tax revenue jumps to about $2.5 million. And what that would mean in terms of during the TRID value capture period for PPS, you would be looking at roughly $640,000 on an annual basis, or a 17 times increase in what you're currently receiving. And then at the end of that TRID period, when all of the debt is retired, you would be looking at, roughly $2.5 million, which would represent a 69 times increase in what from what you all receive from this site currently. Very significant activation and return. And so why we think this is critical, because these are dollars that can be used for everyday functions that the school board needs. This increase would, start to accrue after assessment of these properties. So we're talking about, hopefully no more than a 4 or 5 year period with construction and activation. So then you would start to receive that increase in those dollars at that time. And then when everything is fully online, that would bump up and you'd continue to receive an increase in your baseline tax revenues until the retirement of the debt, which then you would receive the full amount, which we projected again at about $2.5 million. And so in terms of what are the TRID dollars going to be used to fund, primarily public infrastructure and affordable housing. Those are the two key categories of funding. So we have public space and public infrastructure improvements at about 13 million. And then we have affordable housing, which we're talking about roughly 25 million. And that affordable housing is going to be split between the Esplanade development site. There will be affordable housing on the Esplanade development site, and then we are creating an affordable housing fund for the neighborhood where folks will be able to apply to develop new affordable housing within the Manchester Chateau neighborhood. And so just a couple of things to highlight that are going to be that we expect to be funded. In part is the Beaver Ave two-way conversion. This is necessary to help unlock the site. The Juniata Underpass. This is a community project as well. The Allegheny Avenue public space improvements, so that's further on into the TRID area. And then the Route 65 planning study implementation. So there's a federal grant through the Reconnecting Communities program that is studying options for mitigating the existing conditions of Route 65. And so there would be a portion of TRID dollars available to try to implement some of those recommendations and figure out how do we reduce the burden of 65 on the neighborhood and start to really try to reconnect those two things. And then, as I mentioned, we would have gap financing for affordable housing. And so just a couple of things to highlight from a dollars perspective. We're talking about $54 million in neighborhood investment, with $25 million dedicated to affordable housing, and then $1.5 million also available for transportation studies. And these would be transportation studies that would help PRT understand the feasibility of extending service up and down that corridor. And so I want to open up for any questions that we may have, or if there's a desire to look at more of the materials. But I want to reemphasize that this project and the TRID meets PPS's scorecard for investment. So we're talking about public infrastructure investment, the elimination of blight. We're talking about catalytic redevelopment that is going to include, jobs programs, jobs opportunities, and a significant increase on tax revenues that are currently generated from the site. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions or any desire for me to go through other slides on the presentation.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for coming back. I realize that you shared this information with us previously, so I appreciate that. I have a few questions, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the board. When we chatted in December, I believe it was Dr. Reed asked about the consideration of MWBE business status. in the business and office rental spaces. Do you have any insight into if there will be MWBE business considerations when renting out the spaces?
Yes, I believe that is correct, that there will be. There have been discussions about, on the retail level, having MWB and local businesses represented all throughout the development, including at some retail-specific kiosks and other space that would be available. So yes.
Awesome, thank you. And so right now in the city of Pittsburgh, and particularly the downtown area, we're seeing a lot of requested reassessments and subsequent devaluations of the commercial real estate downtown. How is the current estimated commercial value of this Esplanade area taking into consideration those like devaluations that are happening just across the river in downtown?
Yeah, so the projections were done by a third party that has done this quite often, and so they're adequately conservative and sensitive to what is realistic in today's real estate market. That being said, we can't predict the future, but one thing that I would note with something like a TRID is that as we go through the mechanics and the agreements and the paperwork, the developer enters into something with the URA that's called a minimum payment agreement. And that minimum payment agreement does a couple of things, but one, it ensures that if the assessed values, if there's some sort of shortfall because the assessed values didn't hit where they need to be, that the tax revenue that was supposed to be generated will be made up by the developer, and that's a standard feature of all of our TIFs TRIDs. And so we would have that as well in this. So in a sense, there would be protection against sort of that market fluctuation because of that minimum payment guarantee.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. Can I request that you go back to the slides about the public, you said the city council public hearing is February 12th, and then I believe you mentioned another public hearing that's upcoming as well.
So that slide unfortunately has a slight error in it. So on the city side, the next activity from the city is the public hearing on February 12th. There is an error that says post agenda, and this just got copy pasted from an out of date schedule. So I apologize for that. But the next City of Pittsburgh opportunity is on February 12th. And I believe that's at 1:30 p.m. in City Council chambers.
Great, awesome. And then this question is for our legal counsel, Mr. Weiss. Are we required to have a separate public hearing on the TRID, or the public hearing for this would just be our general public hearing and constituents would be welcome to come comment on this if they so chose?
There is no special public hearing required.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Great, those were all of my questions. I believe that my colleague has offered to facilitate questions in the room. So Yael, would you mind looking around the room and facilitating any questions from in-person folks?
Happy to do that, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you.
Thanks. At the very beginning, you started talking about the 45 community meetings. You did 3 surveys. There was something that I missed.
Yes, 1 second. So we had over 45 stakeholder interviews, 5 public meetings with approximately 400 attendees, 3 surveys with over 100 unique responses.
45 interviews. How many people were in those interviews?
I'm not sure because they were with different stakeholder groups, because there could have been more than one person.
So it wouldn't have been like one-on-one. There would have been like focus groups kind of things.
In some cases, it may have been focus groups, but in others, it may have been, for example, Council President Lavelle would have been a stakeholder interview. So he may have been a one-on-one, but there were other community groups, I believe, including River Life and Bidwell Corporation. So they would have been included in that as well. So.
And you said that Representative Lavelle did hold a meeting
So on January 14th of this year, so just last month, Council President Lavelle hosted a meeting to update the community on the Esplanade Development Project as well as the Manchester Chateau Trid, and that was held at MCC's office.
Do you have any idea how many people were there?
I
Estimate.
yeah,
Estimate.
about 60 to 70 in
Okay.
person with the same online.
Okay, so it wasn't just a teeny group of people.
No, not at all.
All right, and in December, I did ask specifically about community, and that I had heard there were complaints amongst the community, and at that time, it seemed to be your view that there weren't. Obviously, we've had now 2 public hearings where lots of people came. Now, I don't know if that's representative of the whole community or if just a small group that are making a lot of noise. I would like to know if you feel that, I mean, this looks like you've had a lot of community input, but again, we're hearing a lot of negativity. So I'd like to hear your take on dealing with that.
Yes. So after the meeting, there were a number of people who came up directly and spoke to me, and they said that I had addressed a couple of their concerns. So the first concern that I was told is that people were really afraid that their property tax dollars were going to be paying somehow into the TRID, and that's not the case. It is 100% based on the Esplanade development. So if the Esplanade development does not happen, there is no TRID. There's no increase in taxes or anything like that. Another item that folks were concerned about is what is this going to do to the real estate market in general, home prices, things of that nature. And I'm not going to pretend to have sufficient expertise to tell you what's going to happen in the future, because if I could, I wouldn't be here. I'd be rolling in the dough. But what I do know is that the Esplanade site itself is talking about adding 300 housing units, and so that's going to be an area to alleviate some of that pressure that's in the Manchester neighborhood. And then with the Affordable Housing Fund that we're putting together, that's going to be an opportunity to address housing needs further along the different income levels, and also, in a way that can help keep with the neighborhood character.
Okay, and in one of these slides, there's a corridor, the Palisades or something, if I'm remembering, but that's the way to get from one to the other without the danger that was going to be a walkway or a pathway that they can get from one to the other without being in danger from traveling from one section to the other?
I think you may be talking about the Juniata underpass.
Yeah, that would be
Yep.
it. I don't know where I got Palisades. Sounds good to me. But okay, the Juniata. Okay.
Yeah,
And that is what that was intended to do.
Yes. So my understanding of the intention right now is to make that, like you said, easier to get across, improve lighting, improve safety features. I do think, I know it's a little too early to say, but I do know there's an understanding to have, some sort of public art or other community activation there to make it sort of at least during the spring and the summer and early fall, a real sort of community space where people can come and spend time and perhaps even have some vendors along there. So it's really intended to reactivate, make it safer, make it more available as a space for the community.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Barker?
Good evening, all. Sorry I cannot be there in person. So I just wanted to touch a little bit about what Director Sylvia was asking. I was at the meeting down at MCC, and there were a lot of actual neighbors there. What I can tell you is that it was almost about 50-50. Some folk were like really upset about how things have transpired, because they were saying that the actual numbers are sort of kind of fudged, like the community didn't have that much say so, that much input. I don't know. All I know is that they are asking that Lavelle, Councilman Lavelle and MCC produce minutes for these community meetings that were taking place. and that there was other people that were really excited. Um, from my vantage point, I just want to know, like, when we're speaking affordable housing, when we're talking about the AMI, I just honestly don't feel like um, an AMI from like a Northview would be the equivalent to an AMI from like a Squirrel Hill. So when we speak about affordable housing, I really feel like we need to make sure that we're not getting some people's hopes up high into believing that they can actually live in some of these new places and spaces because they may not be able to afford it based on what the AMI is. Also, I read that there were 100 off-site affordable housing units supposed to be built. So my question is, what is the definition of off-site? Is it still in Manchester, Chateau area, off-site of what we're talking about now? Can you give a little bit more detail in regards to what that was? Now, granted, this was not your newsletter that came out. This was actually Councilman Lavelle's newsletter, where it vowed that there would be 100 off-site units, but maybe you all can shed a little light on what that off-site affordable housing is entailing.
I'm not familiar with the details of the 100 units from the council president's newsletter, so we will definitely, look into that and follow up with you all. But I will say, in terms of offsite, when I use the phrase offsite, I mean within Manchester. So outside of the area, that's the Esplanade development. And I guess, let me see if I have a slide that can perhaps illustrate it a little bit better. So this slide, and I apologize for sort of the faintness here, but if you can see the hand where my cursor is moving, so the Esplanade site is down here in the blue, and when we talk about off-site, what we're talking about is really this area here of Manchester, as well as this area here in Allegheny West, for primarily those public infrastructure improvements to Allegheny Avenue. So, but the primary focus, especially for the affordable housing, is the Manchester neighborhood.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I have some questions, and I'll see if there are any more questions online or in the room. I want to follow up on the questions about the affordable housing. Can you tell me a little bit more, for my own education, around what the fund is versus, so I understand that it's for offsite, and you just showed us what area that would be, but just a little bit more about how that fund operates.
Yes.
And who has access to it.
Right. So it'll be a fund that's housed at the URA, and it'll function similar to other URA housing programs, meaning that a developer would be able to come and apply to do for funding for a development project. So the way that the guidelines are and these are guidelines that are in process of being finalized, so the affordability information is not set in stone yet, but there are different levels of affordability that are being discussed, and that includes 50% AMI or below, 80% AMI or below, and then potentially a component of workforce, which would really help the neighborhood bring on some more diversity. So that would be anywhere from 81 to 120% AMI. But the focus is really to have affordability in the neighborhood across the income spectrum. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tom Link. I'm a Chief Development Officer at the URA, and I presented actually in December. Just to add to James's point on the affordability. The guidelines for this fund have not been finalized. They would go to the URA board and have two public and, opportunities for public input. I think there's still opportunity for some discussion as specifically how that might be utilized both in terms of developer housing and for sale housing. So some of this is still in process, and certainly inputs is going to be important as those guidelines come to fruition to roll out these dollars for the fund and for the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Two more questions around all of the community engagement that happened. In terms of who was in that room, especially for the 400 some folks in attendance, do you have a sense, like, did folks put in what their address was? Do we know how many folks from the neighborhood were at that meeting?
I don't have that direct information, but I can try to reach out to the vendors and see if there's any breakdown that we can get on that. But I will say, from the discussions that we had, because this process was undertaken by the URA, city planning, PRT as well. And so, my understanding from the vendors is that they really did try to have a comprehensive effort. So they distributed leaflets throughout the neighborhood, and I understand that may not always be the most effective way, but I'm just trying to illustrate that while we would certainly hope for a response rate that's out of the ballpark, right? I just know from my own professional experience with doing surveys, especially surveys, getting a high response rate is almost a fool's errand, because people are just inundated with other requests, and if the survey's not worded the right way, or if it takes too long, you really only have 3 to 5 minutes to capture anyone's attention in that way. So I just want to point out all of these challenges in getting a robust response. But they certainly did try a variety of methods to reach them. And so I can reach back out to our colleagues and see if there's any additional information that we can get.
That would be great, and I completely understand that there is a difference between effort put into getting community feedback and receiving that community feedback. And you are right that we are also familiar when the community comes out to let you know how well or how poorly you did at that. My last question is, so we've had a number of public hearings where community members have come out, and a neighborhood group is asking for a meeting with the developer, and my question is, what is the barrier for that, in addition to all of the other community engagement that has happened?
I don't have a good answer to that question. I wasn't aware of that, so that's something we can certainly look into.
Thank you so much. That's it for my questions. Okay, so and Ms. Yord, that's it for inside the room. So I'm going to pass the meeting back over to you. Oh, please, yes.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Sattler. I'm from the solicitor's office. I had a question about the tax revenue on your slide, where you say that the base tax revenue is currently, I think, about $83,000. Is that for the school district of Pittsburgh only, or is that for all three taxing bodies?
This particular slide is for all three taxing bodies.
Okay, and then your $8 million projected annual tax, does that include, I thought you said it did, but I want to confirm, does that include parking tax revenues for the city of Pittsburgh?
Yes.
Or is it just real estate?
No, this is, I believe this is the inclusive.
With all of those?
With amusement and parking tax.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the presentation, for answering all our questions. Thank you, Director Silk, for facilitating the in-person stuff. If there are no further questions, I think I'd like to see, I know I'm definitely curious to see what the turnout is for the City Council hearing on the 12th, so I'll encourage all of the school board directors to listen in on that one as well. And we will be back in touch as to when we can get this on the agenda for a vote.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. If there are no other questions and there are no other agenda items, then I would like to propose that we close this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.